welcome back everybody, and welcome again to Gabriela and James. And we've got Ken online to get the feedback from IESBA. So thank you very much, Gabriela. I'm going to hand over to you. Shall we again make the logical breaks after each section? So over to you.
Thank you very much, Linda and the PIOB board. Happy to speak to these slides and provide you a little bit of an update of the work of the IESBA on the most relevant areas. But of course, I will be available to any questions that you may have on other topics which are not in these slides. So, first thing, sustainability and experts, then we will move to firm culture and governance, and finally, a very brief update on the CIV's project, which is a very dear one to the PIOB. On sustainability, this is nothing new, but just as a context, we are, of course, on track to, for approval in December 2024. This is a little bit the timeline of the work and the milestones between now, where we are, and December. The task forces on sustainability task force and experts task force will meet in 2 weeks to address the developments and the work that has been that is being done by the staff on the basis of the discussions that we had in September at the board. So the task force will discuss a revised version of the draft provisions and prepare the documents for the next call of the board, which is on November 8th. So this was an exceptional board meeting or call that we decided to hold to make sure that arriving at in December, everything will be as stable as possible. So this will be an important landmark and milestone, November 8th, a virtual board meeting where the intention is as much as possible to discuss and solve any possible remaining issues and concerns and get out of this call with the work almost done, which means that between our intention is that between November 8th and December 6th, or before that, because the documents will have to be posted before, the team and the board will mostly be working on the finalization of the standards on the basis of this discussion. We don't expect to have remaining critical strategic topics to be discussed in December, and actually the ones that will be discussed in November 8th are, I think, just some 2 or 3 remaining topics, which of course will still deserve the attention of the board, and I suspect some discussions which can be relevant for the finalization of the documents. Our plan is that the IESBA board meeting will be held between the 2nd of December and the 6th of December, and the plan is to have these standards approved by the board on the 6th of December. If you look at the agenda, which I think has, I don't know if it has already been published or not, but the agenda is mostly sustainability and experts. Of course, we'll have to address a few other topics, but it starts with sustainability on Mondays and Tuesday, etc., with a view of having the approval by the end of the week on the 6th of December. And the plan is to submit the due process packages, so the final standards, approved final standards, and the basis for conclusions to the PIOB for the due process purposes by the 13th of December. This is, of course, an unusual approach to the work because it usually takes a significant extended or larger time to submit these documents. This was planned before the summer so as to make sure that we will be in a position to deliver these documents or provide these documents to the PIOB as soon as possible, as close to the approval date as possible. So the teams are already working in parallel with the finalization with the start of the standards. The teams are already working on the basis for conclusions and other documents so as to make sure that this week after the board meeting, or these days after the board meeting, will be used mostly to finalize, tweak, and adjust what will have already been done and ready by the time. This is, of course, another factor, another source of stress, and another stress test for the teams and the board as well. The board will not have much time to see the documents, but I'd like also to recall and highlight that these basis for conclusions are not board documents, are staff documents. That's how they have always been treated and understood. They are not approved by the board, so of course we give the board the opportunity to look and see and highlight any possible fatal flaws, but they are not board documents. Otherwise, it would not be possible to be dealt with this way, because we would need to give the board more time. In any case, the basis for conclusions will be very much based on the documents that have already been prepared for the board, so that there will be nothing new or very new for the board members, nor to the PIOB, I would say, as the documents for the board meetings, mostly for the September board meeting, were already prepared, having in mind that they should serve as a basis for the basis for conclusion. So this means that this is a different way of working, an agile way of working that we are testing and piloting. I think that if it works well, and I think it will work well, it will serve as for the future as a way of simplifying the life of the boards and of the team, even if in the first moment it may seem, and it is, very burdensome, because it's completely changing the process and the way of working, etc. But I really hope that this will become an element of agility, both for the IESBA, the board, and the PIOB as well. So these are the plans. In short, why have we made this effort and this sprint to finalize the standards as soon as possible in December, and certainly in December? And this is nothing new for the PIOB as well, but just to recall that this was, firstly, a response and a commitment that we made to regulators mostly, but also to the market, asking for finalization by the end of 2024, and the reasons are the reasons that are familiar to you, that because mandatory assurance will become mandatory on January 2025, and this was the main reason why, namely IOSCO, but also IFIAR, PIOB as well, along this 2 years process, were insistently asking if we would be able to be ready on 2024. And it was not evident at the start, since we started working in December 2022, so this was really an accelerated process compared to what we have done before, in a very complex area, with 3 projects at the end running in parallel: ethics standards for sustainability reporting, ethics and independent standards for sustainability assurance, and experts. There was a clear call and need for the standards to be ready by 2024. This was the commitment that we made publicly. We had the IOSCO reports or statements, and the FSB statements as well, 2 or 3, saying we welcome the commitment to be ready on 2024. This is needed. So this is what we have done, and proud to have managed to get here on time and to meet our commitments. So also, and this is not only about IESBA responding positively to stakeholders' requests, we made our own reflection on the topic, and of course we came to the conclusion that for the public interest, this was what we needed to do. For all these reasons, but also because, and speaking about coordination, ISA 5000 will be, and is already premised on IESA. There is an undeniable connection and interrelation between the 2 standards, even if both are framework neutral, but the interoperability between the 2 standards is key, is critical. And of course, if we weren't ready on time to allow those who will consider ISA 5000 for adoption and implementation to be able to consider IESA jointly with ISA 5000, there would be, or there will be, depending on how it happens, a risk of fragmentation, because jurisdictions making decisions on adoption and implementation may move forward with other options in terms of ethics standards or ethics framework if they are not available for them to take them on board. So this risk, and this can happen in a very short time frame because with mandatory assurance happening in January 2025, ISA 5000 being available in September, there is a risk in this very short time frame that decisions are made which can harm the public interest, purpose, and objective of having a consistent, fully consistent, and interoperable framework and package for performance standards and ethics standards. This was always the goal. I don't know if you remember the famous slide and very simple slide with the final infrastructure that we all envisaged. And so interestingly, even the IESBA is using our slide because they really think that it's the way to take with a consistent reporting framework, sustainability reporting framework, consistent sustainability assurance framework, and a consistent ethical and independence framework for reporting and assurance. This is how the final infrastructure should look like, and of course, for that purpose, which really serves the public interest, we needed to be ready on time and to deliver and make available the standards for those who will make their decisions, jurisdictions who will start working on adoption and implementation, to be able to work together on the package of performance standards and ethics standards. So in September, September was a very, very important meeting because after all the efforts on coordination, and of course we all know that coordination, the main topics for coordination were also the main topics where the board was still wanting to discuss and make some amendments and etc. It was a really, really productive and I think constructive meeting. Before in other meetings we had seen a little bit more nervous and concerned approaches. Even the board members who still had some considerations were very constructive and very focused on what really matters. So there was a very broad support for the clarified independence principles addressing these topics of group sustainability assurance engagements and value chain components, which were basically the most critical topics that we discussed in September. All the rest was more or less stable. There was support for retaining the proposed scope from the start, which puts this framework at the same level as the requirement and the exigency as the existing part 4A for financial statements. And with respect to the profession agnostic approach that we took, also under the call of regulators and others, but also upon the reflection that we also made and that IESBA also took as an option and a strategic approach to the standards, it was considered stable. There are some remaining questions about what are you going to do to make sure that the non-professional accountants will be able to understand and adopt and etc. But we are already working on that. It's not that public, it's not that noisy, but the work that we have been doing with them is an incredible work from the start until we managed to get this agreement or decision from IAF to adopt the IESBA standards. But of course we will continue, and it's in our plans for the near future. There was support for the balanced approach with respect to communication with no cloud. There were these questions that also the PIOB raised about why consider communicate and not communicate. So we moved away from the initial proposal in the ED and managed to get a balance between the considerations of those, mostly regulators and policymakers, who thought that in all situations the auditor or the practitioner should communicate in case there was something that he or she was faced with, while others think that this should not at all exist. So this is a balanced approach, and I think it's a very well-balanced approach because it takes into consideration, namely, the concerns about the balance between the need to communicate and the confidentiality reasons that over time did not allow for such an approach. There are a few remaining topics, as I was saying at the start, and the few remaining matters to address are the further clarity or additional clarity with respect to the meaning of the use of the term at which assurance work is performed, and this was a very much discussed topic with the IESBA, where we both made some changes to make sure that it was consistent, but still there is some work to be done in that respect. On the transitional provisions, this is particularly relevant for non-assurance services, fees and things like that, where questions were raised about how are we going to deal with existing situations with a pre-period of contracting non-assurance services and etc. So this is already being addressed by the task force. The task force, as I said, will meet in 2 weeks, and this is one of the topics in the agenda. And I think that I can say that the proposal from the task force, I never want to go ahead of my board and my task forces, but I think that I can say that there will be proposals on transitional provisions for non-assurance services. At least they are being provided, and I think that they will satisfy the concerns of those who were not very comfortable with a more one-off approach. And some questions still on the use of multiple external experts, which is more about clarifying the approach than about making changes on what's being proposed. Now, on implementation, support, adoption, and etc. This is, I was telling Tom, that my mind is already in 2025. So this is what keeps me awake at night today and yesterday and tomorrow, is how are we going to make sure that these standards will have the necessary and the appropriate level of adoption and implementation. And this will be a very, very big effort, which needs to be very well prepared, very well structured, very strategically addressed. Of course, we will promote the standards as much as we can. We have an informal group of board members who are taking care of this to make sure that we address this topic in a very structured, strategic, and planned way, that there will be no overlaps, that there will be synergies where synergies can be made, etc. So the key pillars of this approach and strategy is, of course, advocacy and engagement, so we have to go around the world, virtually or in person, to make sure that these standards are known and understood. A lot of capacity building, but this mostly through collaboration. And what does this mean? The IESBA is a very small team, is a very small, we don't have the resources, of course, ourselves to do what is needed in terms of adoption, in terms of capacity building. So the strategy here is to use others to do this. We are trying to implement some partnerships, of course, with IFAC, it's the first one, but also with others. The UNCTAD has been a very, very reliable and useful partner for us. IOSCO, of course, IESBA, our first foundation. So as much as possible, we will use the others to do what we can't do. It's about training the trainer, it's about using their platforms, it's about being taken on board in their fast-moving trains in this area, and etc. And of course, monitor how it goes, which is going to be a very difficult but important part of the process. Of course, we will do this in close coordination with IESBA, even if the timelines are not the same. We have a common effective date, and there will be some joint initiatives to launch these standards as a package, as they should be. So after everything is stable and done, we will, and we are already speaking about that, Tom and I, what can we do jointly to make sure that this package is a package and can be used by stakeholders as such. And that's it on sustainability, and I'll stop here, Linda, and happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Gabriela. We had a preparation session yesterday and obviously discussed this. It was Janine's first time observing the IESBA meeting, and she came back and gave us feedback on the really good engagement and interaction when it comes to the debates at your board. There are a couple of comments, and you obviously, and of course, stress the importance of getting the standard out on time, and that is really important. And I know you've got two more meetings to go before then, and you spoke about some of the things that's on your agenda to finalize. And we have those on our list as well. And I'll quickly go through the list of key points. Janine will fill the gaps if I leave anything out. Key points that we discussed. But I believe there is a little bit of an overarching theme when it comes to probably from now until you hopefully get to the place to approve this in December, which you know, and that is how to deal with complexity and create clarity. Which is always a very difficult thing in standard setting, because how do you cut it down to the level of information that's clear and concise? And I know you've done a lot of work. You spoke about some of those. So I'm going to, in no particular order, maybe just run through the list of things that we raised, and some of them were already on your list as well. So let me just do that, and then I'll check in with you, Janine. So the first one, and you specifically spoke about it, and you specifically said you need to create further clarity on which level of independence is applicable in which situation. And we saw that type of a flow chart that you attached, if I'm not mistaken, behind your report, which is useful, and the concept of a flowchart is useful, but many of us still struggle to understand it, and we thought, you know, if we struggle to understand it, will practitioners and will non-practitioners understand it? So I agree with you that there's absolutely, that's the core of it. People need to know where to go to, what's applicable to me, what independence requirements apply to me or apply to other people, assurance providers that are used in doing that opinion. So that was the first one. We also wondered whether the independence requirements, especially for the first round, might be too restrictive for the sustainability assurance providers down in the value chain. Maybe just something to think about, and I'm sure you've debated it. Maybe you can comment on that. Then on no-claw, you spoke about no-claw, and you explained the difference between having requirements and you know, and how you described it for at the value chain level. But and you said it's a balanced approach, but we just battled with the principle that it's, you know, that no-claw is not necessarily a requirement, you know, classified as a requirement for everybody. So maybe you can just expand on that, because I know you've touched on it. I'm just quickly checking my notes. And maybe just on that no-claw point, we thought that it is, in any event, when it comes to those assurance providers, they are in the value chain. They are communicating in any event to the component assurance provider, and on other things, on independence requirements and all sorts of other things. So why it's not so difficult to also have no-claw requirements. Then and this was one that we had quite a bit of a debate on the proportion of fees, where you talk about, and we think this can be quite a big hurdle if you don't think very carefully about that. When we talk about when it is a mandatory, you brought in this principle that when it's a mandatory assurance engagement, then if the auditor is also providing the sustainability assurance function or service, then that wouldn't be considered, that assurance assignment wouldn't be considered as being added to other assurance services, and therefore not getting you over that threshold of what potentially affects your independence as the auditor. But when it's not a mandatory requirement by law, then it would. So I think that might be problematic in many places, because I can think of quite a couple of countries that might not immediately for example, where I come from, I'm not sure that there's immediately going to be a mandatory requirement, but there are very significant international companies, and now suddenly there's this problem that by providing the assurance service and also doing the audit, there's an independence issue, because it's very likely, I believe, that the assurance work on the sustainability report fee-wise might actually be more than the assurance work on the financial, especially in early years. If you think about all the experts and so on, might actually be more than the cost of the statutory audit. So that it actually hooks onto another principle in the code in any event that talks about assurance services being included in considering that independence with other services. So just really something that we think you need to reconsider, because we do believe that it's going to create this hurdle for auditors to also provide the assurance on sustainability reports, which is very far from ideal, especially for corporates, because that is often the people that know your business really well. So if you want to comment on that, that would be useful. And then there are one or two more before I hand over to Janine. You spoke about the transitional provisions, which is really important, agree. We just wondered with the sort of the open-endedness potentially of the transitional provisions, whether there's unintended consequences. And then we spoke a little bit about the level playing fields for different assurance providers, where you talk about the level of knowledge, skills, and experience for professional accountants, but then with the non-professional accountants, it's not a requirement, it's the expectation, and you touched on that. And you changed the wording to expectation, but is that not making it harder for the professional accountants? Does that create level playing fields between the different assurance providers? And then my last comment is just on the scope of Part 5, which is mandatory or general purpose assurance assignments. Therefore, if they, and then Part 4B, which is for non-PAs. But I'll go back to, for example, the examples that I just mentioned in a country that hasn't adopted this. What will those assurance, it's not clear what those assurance providers should, where do they fit in? Do they fit into Part 5 because that's just for mandatory, or do they fit into Part 4B because that's just for non-PA? So that's maybe a clarity point as well. Before I dig myself into a hole, Janine, did we need to clarify anything, or did I leave anything out?
Thank you, Linda. You gave a good summary. But maybe a few more things just to clarify also with some additional concerns around the clarity of the charts. I understood, Gabriela, that it's still work in progress and that your task force is meeting in 2 weeks' time. And as Linda was saying, the chart is very helpful, and it's very complex to start with all the different types of practitioners involved, whether they're a component practitioner, another practitioner, but also depends on whether there is they're doing their work for a component, a group component or a value chain component, and whether there is sufficient appropriate involvement by the group sustainability assurance practitioner in the work that another is doing, and whether he or she can give direction, supervision, and review. So it's a very complex thing. And the clarity, as Linda said, is of course is important so that everyone can understand. But there, since I also saw that there was further thinking by the task force in your presentation later on there in the attachment, there is an updated schedule. But that triggered two things for me in a sense, or three concerns actually. The clarity is, to make it more specific, the clarity aspect sees also upon who is now actually addressed in the chart, from which perspective or whose perspective is the independence mentioned. And it sometimes sort of seems as if that could change from whether it's from the perspective of another practitioner or the component practitioner versus the group sustainability assurance practitioner and their firm. So that's an important concern. The other one is the one that you have now the direction supervision review as a dividing principle. And so it also could be that a component, a group component that is part of the consolidated financial statements is actually the group sustainability assurance practitioner would say, no, I cannot give any direction supervision or review. And then the independence regime is much less stringent than in the latest version I saw in your presentation than for any other group component in the consolidated group. So I'm talking about a group component that normally is consolidated. There's in the financial audit you have a component auditor that is doing a lot of work, but for the sustainability assurance, the independence is then only that you need to have some confirmation, or it's less than you would normally have in a financial audit. And I think that's a very important aspect to think through and to make clear why that is, why that it can be less, because there is the risk, and that was also a debate at the IESBA, that undue decision made maybe to say, yeah, I cannot have sufficient appropriate involvement, and less independence requirements is also attractive maybe.
And I think, Janine, the point is made, there seem to be a lot of question marks, and there's some clarity needed.
Clarity. But the last one is another one, and that is about the value chain that you were referring to. The concern is also when it is a value chain, now when there is direction supervision and review, but it's still in the value chain, there is now also a higher level of independence required than if there were no direction supervision and review. And the question is, could that have any impact on, like, companies not able to find an independent sustainability assurance practitioner because of the fact that in the value chain there is a component that has this independence requirement. So those are the things we really want to ask you to, your task force, to work on and to make it clear to us how that works and whether there are risks or not and what these risks are, and for the next meeting. So then on the NOCLAR, you say a balanced approach. I also wanna it's between the group sustainability assurance practitioner all the way through the value chain, but it's also between the group sustainability assurance practitioner and the financial auditor, where we want to ask your attention for. And a balanced approach, I struggle a little bit, because in your proposal, also what came out of the discussion in September, there is already unless prohibited by laws and regulations. So why would you need a balanced approach, so not requiring NOCLAR, while you already have it's only applicable when your laws and regulations allow for it. So I struggle to see why you should limit yourself then in requiring NOCLAR communication. And on the transitional provision, maybe to make it a little bit more clear with an example, the big risk on the in particular also could be multi-year contracts that would be entered into before the 15th of December in 26. Could be, for instance, which are actually services that are often provided by accounting firms, providing support in the internal control system for reporting on sustainability information. And there is the self-review threat. And the question is, what will happen under your current transitional provision, and what to do with this self-review threat? And it's an open-ended provision now, so good to hear that you're going to work on this. But also, it's not only that it's open-ended, but also there's some unclarity. Like if there is a self-review threat, is still, with this transitional provision, would that then still be that the conceptual framework with safeguards approach, the threats and safeguards approach would still apply? Or would this transitional provision override the safeguards approach, or the threats and safeguards approach? So that is also very important to understand. So I think those were the most important things. Yeah, and the expectation, one more. There's also one on the expectation for a sustainability assurance practitioner on quality management. And that's also a difference if you look at the level playing field with a professional accountant, because they have to follow, assuming they use ISA's quality, or, well, ISQ1.
This is the expectation.
So here it's the wording is the expectation. So thanks.
Back to you. Thank you, Gabriela.
I'll try to cover everything. I think that Ken is online, so if necessary, I'll ask Ken to provide a little bit more information, not only about the most technical aspect, even if I don't think that this is the place to discuss technical.
Yeah, we don't want to go into the technical detail.
If any clarity is necessary, or if Ken thinks that it's useful, I'll kindly ask him to come in. So first thing, how to deal with complexity and create clarity. Yes, we are aware of that concern of some complexity that still persists in the proposals. Now, two things which I think it's important to say. First is that, of course, we are addressing that, and we'll address it until the very end in the best way possible. It is in our interest and in public interest that what we do is well understood, is clear, can be implemented, enforceable, and etc. So irrespective of the success or lack of success of this effort, this is something that we have very clear, that we acknowledge, and that we will be working on until the very last minute. But there is also something that it's important to highlight, which is we are dealing with a complex reality. So we can tweak and work on the way we address that complex reality. We can't change the reality, or otherwise we'll have to change the whole system. When we start speaking about another practitioner, the practitioner component, value chain component, value chain entity, etc., group engagement in, this is a complex reality. So there is no way that we can change that reality unless we decide to clean up everything and start from scratch. And I doubt that we will get to a simpler solution, because this is by nature a complex reality. So we need to separate the complexity of the fundamentals and of the reality and the complexity of the way the standards address that complexity. Again, there is a commitment, my commitment and the commitment of my board and team to make it as simple as possible. So any suggestions in that respect would be very welcome, because you know how these things work. In developing the standards, there is so much technical work, so much thinking, so much discussion, that sometimes it's a little bit difficult to step back and see it from the distance and understand how we could have done it in a different way. Suggestions, very welcome. The level of independence of each situation, the flowcharts are, well, as you saw, Janine, something that was prepared from one afternoon or evening to the morning after. So we did not have the time nor the opportunity for the task force to reconvene and work on the flowcharts, but of course there is a commitment that we will make them as understandable, readable, and simple as possible. And we take good note of that proposal, or that concern, that in each situation it must be very clear what's in it for the practitioner, for the firm, and etc. So that we separate the situations and segment them in a way which is very clear. The comment on if we are becoming too restrictive, and namely if there will be difficulty in the market to find an independent auditor or practitioner due to the requirements on value chain. Here, let's be clear. We came, even if it's probably not yet evident, we came to the lowest level of requirement that we could have. The next one would be not having anything on value chain. And I don't think that this is what the PIOB and stakeholders and the biggest part of the stakeholders want. Of course, there may be some stakeholders who would like it, but we don't think at all that this is in the public interest. We had that discussion before when we decided to include it in our exposure draft. The reactions of stakeholders were what they were. There were some concerns that there was an ethical framework for value chain without a performance framework, which was as developed. IESBA did it, we coordinated. So I think that in practice we have all that we need. We did a lot of work and made a lot of strategic decisions in terms of lowering the requirements, and this was made in September. And namely, we, just to give you some examples, we deleted the provisions requiring the application of the no or has reasons to believe test with respect to a value chain entity if the firm is using the work of another practitioner. We developed a new structure that simplifies the requirements and aligns with ISO 5000. This is really a simpler approach than the one that we had in the exposure draft. Whoever performs assurance work at the value chain component within the reporting boundary, and this is new, and also to align with ISO 5000 and IESBA, needs to be independent. And we don't think that we can go below this. It's really the minimum that we could require in terms of value chain. In thinking about the public interest, probably we should be requiring more. Probably the initial proposal in the exposure draft was more exigent, more requiring, but you know, trying to address everything. But we are also sensitive to the comments that this is new. There can be so many entities in the value chain, a burden, administrative burden. We removed all the administrative burden. In fact, there is nothing new here. In addition, this is not mentioned in our documents, but just think, for instance, about what's happening in Europe, about with the CSDDD, the due diligence directive, where the value chain becomes an incredible important part of the story. It can be, in some cases, be more important than the subject entity itself. So not addressing value chain, for us, it's a no-go, and we lowered the requirements. Now, a different thing
Gabriela,
is...
apologies to interject, but we absolutely take your point, and that's really useful. I would imagine after all of this, and fairly soon, similar to the IESBA, you'll probably keep your radar on to see if there are any unintended consequences. And if there's something that comes out here, then that is something that you can pick up. So we absolutely take your point.
Sure, Linda, and thank you for raising that. Of course we do, and we think that we have the enough or a lot of critical thinking around the table at the board to bring us and make us aware of unintended consequences, and some of the board members have been very valuable in that respect, and that's why we made these significant amendments to the initial proposal. So on NOCLAR, again, and here I'll ask Ken if he wants to add something, but the question was really what we initially decided was to suggest to consider reporting. This is what's already in the standard on NOCLAR, so we did not innovate in that respect. And then there were comments that from the regulators that we should go beyond that. And all the considerations taken on board, we thought that this was a balanced approach which takes in consideration both the concerns and both the objectives. In the most obvious situations, we require to communicate. When it's outside the network and things like that, the considerations on confidentiality on the one hand and the difficulties and also the unintended consequences suggest that we should only recommend or we require to consider communicating. And this consider to communicate means that if they don't communicate, they will have to have a good basis for not doing that. It's not just a decision like this, I decide to communicate or I don't decide to communicate. Considering means that they have to take on board all the elements that are needed to assess if communicating is the best option or if not communicating is the best option. So the proportion of fees, we had a big discussion during the board meeting on this, and I'm not going again to go ahead of my task force and my board, but I think that there will be changes, significant changes in the final proposal to be discussed in November, which will address all your concerns, Linda, and there were some elements which were discussed on top of those that we already knew, namely aligning with the CSRD approach to this topic and etc. So yes, we were sensitive to the discussion, and I think that there will be significant adjustments to address those concerns. And I'm not going to say more, but not promising, over-promising, but I think I'm confident about what I'm saying. Transitional provisions and the unintended consequences, also the risk that you mentioned, Janine, and that you well raised during the board meeting about these long-term contracts, last-minute contracts, and all these realities that we know that are sometimes used intentionally to circumvent the rule, others because it's just a shallow attitude regarding the existing contracts. All that will be taken on board. I don't have a response to you now about how these transitional provisions will look like. Maybe in 2 weeks' time, I'm in a better position to tell you that. What I can tell you is that that discussion was a very good discussion, I think, because it helped us exactly identify some unintended consequences or possible gaps, let's say that, in the existing provisions, and we will make the best possible and work on the best possible approach to make sure that all that is well covered, because we know that otherwise there will be many ways of making the provision more fragile when being applied. PA versus non-PA. This is a dear topic to everyone and to me as well. First thing, this is the first time that we are experiencing this approach. This is same thing for IESB and IESBA. For any reason, there are more concerns about the IESBA approach to non-PAs. Which is not, I mean, I don't think that these concerns are based on full understanding of the reality. And I'm going to try to explain again. The IESBA standards, the sustainability assurance standards, ethics and independence standards for sustainability assurance, profession agnostic, they are not telling anyone if non-professional accountants should or should not be doing performing sustainability assurance. This is not for the IESBA. We don't say that this must exist or not. This is for the jurisdictions to decide. And we know that there will be jurisdictions which will not allow non-professional accountants to be performing sustainability assurance. Some European countries already made that decision, for instance, while there will be others which will be completely open, namely in some European countries, but also Asia, etc., for that. This is not for us. What we are setting here with these standards is really a framework which, if and when non-professional accountants are allowed, authorized to perform sustainability assurance, then there will be the exact same level of requirement for both professional accountants and non-professional accountants.
Let me just come in here because it's a really important point, because we know one of the big, I understand exactly what you're saying, and one of the big points that the PIOB has been driving when we engage with regulators is exactly the point on level playing field, to say that IESBA can set the standards, or the IESB can set the standards, but it's up to you as policymakers to require those other assurance providers to comply with it. What we battle with is, if you now have a country, or if that requirement comes through in a country to say other assurance providers can also do this work, and you have to comply with the IESBA code, and you read that, then you say, then it reads, a professional accountant should, but if you're not a professional accountant, it's expected of you. So can you see that in the wording of the standard, even if you're required to read it, me as the non-professional accountant will say, well, I'm not the professional accountant, so I can choose if I want to do this. I'm expected, but maybe there's a good reason not to. And that's what our concern is, because we absolutely agree you can't be setting the requirement in law. But once that requirement is set in law, there are two different verbs being used to say.
Sorry, Alina. I see your point. I confess that it hadn't come to my mind that could create that confusion, and maybe we can still address it through guidance or some changes. But our approach is the following. We can't say in the code that non-professional accountants must, because we don't have that authority. But what we are saying is that if regulators, policymakers, whatever, decide that you are allowed, then you have to comply with this.
If required by law, then they must. I think that's sort of stronger wording that it's expected.
Okay, we will take that on board and see what we can do to clarify that topic, but I'd like to clarify that our vision and our objective is to have exactly the same framework for anyone providing the same services. And for the future, this will really be our line of thinking. If anyone is providing a service, it is in the public interest that the client, the investor, etc., does not have to care about who is providing the service, because he or she will be equally protected irrespective of the provider. This is the approach of the financial services regulations and laws and etc. Doesn't matter who you are, it matters that you have to protect the investor. So this is our vision, and we are not, it is not in our plans or vision that there will be calibrable provisions for professional accountants and non-professional accountants, which at some point we were required to do, and we said, no, there is no way you can calibrate. This is in the public interest, this is what investors need. So if you want to be active, please comply. On scope of Part 5, as you saw, the board reconfirmed that this is the scope that we should have for the time being. And this is this project, or this on sustainability, is a phased one. So we started by saying, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that for the situations, cases, reports of highest importance, we need to have a framework. We can't have a framework and deliver a framework and develop a framework which covers everything at the same time, because otherwise the complexity will be much bigger. We need to test what we are doing. This is completely new. So let's address what is really more important, which is the required by law for purpose of decision making and all those things. Now, if you ask me, Linda, Janine and all, what about the voluntary reports? Aren't they important? Yes, of course they are. But let's put it like this. In the existing code for financial statements, there is already a difference between those who are required by law and those which are voluntary. That's why you have Part 4A and Part 4B. Different requirements, different levels of requirement for both situations. So this is somehow replicated here, and we could even be satisfied, more or less, with some adjustments, what we have in Part 4B, which will still apply. Part 4B can already be applied to voluntary reports, as it is. Now, you tell me, okay, but it's not fit for purpose because it's not adjusted to sustainability. Right, that's truth, but it already applies and provides some support. Secondly, and you are more than right when you say, what about non-professional accountants? And this is the real problem here, and that's why we need to move forward very fast, because for non-professional accountants, Part 4B doesn't apply because it's not profession agnostic. So we are very conscious of the need to develop something similar to what we did with Part 5 for voluntary reports and other reports. That's what we will prioritize in principle, and again, I don't want to put myself ahead of my board and my team and my task forces, etc. But there is a plan, it's in our strategy and work plan, that we will move forward with this very quickly. So it will be a temporary partial gap because Part 4B already provides some support. It's mandatory for professional accountants, whatever they do. For non-professional accountants, we suggest that they use it. Is it perfect? No. Would it be possible to have a perfect system now?
Can I just clarify? I'm not sure I understand. So is the intention that whether it's for professional accountants, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, you apply the same rules?
No. What we are saying is that in the extant code, you have Part 4A, which applies to the most relevant, mandatory, etc. Part 4B, which are independence requirements, which are not as strict as the one in Part 4A, because they apply to less important reports. Let's put it like this.
But less important being
voluntary,
not
voluntary, for instance.
Voluntary.
Voluntary, for instance.
But how can that be? Why do we have, and I think that's our difficulty, and maybe you must think about it. Again, if a country, I just think there's a huge risk if a country decides not to adopt for whatever reason, and companies decide to voluntarily do assurance because they might be forced, and I'm in situations where that happens, they might be forced by the international investors and all of that. It's sort of not even debatable. It's really concerning that they then play by lighter rules. And I don't understand the support for that. So maybe, I don't think we have to solve it here, but I think you must just take it back to your board and
But I
think
think it's important, I think this is important that everything is clear. And if necessary, I'll ask Ken to provide additional clarity. But this is the existing situation for financial reports. You have the ones which are mandatory audit, right? Which are ruled by independence provisions in Part 4A. And then you have the other ones which are voluntary. And you know that you have lots of financial statements which are voluntary, are not required by law, are voluntary, etc. But if they are not required by law, the thinking behind this is that, well, if they are not required by law, is that the public interest is not as significant and relevant as with mandatory financial reports. And then Part 4B comes in and says, okay, you still have independence requirements, but they are not as strict as the one which apply to mandatory financial reports. This is the existing approach in the code, which has never been, as far as I know, has never been challenged. We are going to replicate exactly the same approach for sustainability reports. More stringent independence requirements for mandatory sustainability reports, similar, equivalent to the existing ones for mandatory financial reports, and a slightly lighter framework for voluntary reports, again, because the conviction or the assumption is that if the regulators did not require a mandatory report, is that because the public interest is not as significant. So this is the approach. We are just, the vision and the objective is to replicate exactly the approach that we have for financial reports.
Thank you, and I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to belabor the point. I would maybe just suggest, Gabriela, that you take it back and think if there's maybe a PI definition or a publicly traded entity definition overlay for this. But, so just think about it, because they might, you can literally get into a country.
They are captured in the existing scope, but we will,
because there might literally be a country where the listed entities are not required, and because therein lies the reputational risk for the,
But yeah. This is captured under the scope, the existing scope. But maybe very quickly, may I ask Ken if necessary to provide additional clarity? Ken, are you there? Oh, he's there.
Thanks, Ken.
Yes,
and anything else
and
from
he's
your
willing
side?
to speak. I see the hand.
Thank you, Ken. I saw your hand. I thought I'll wait for Gabriela to finish. So anything else on your side from, when it comes to any of these aspects would be useful, and then I would really like for us to go to experts. Thanks.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Linda, and I'm conscious of time as well. Maybe on this issue of mandatory requirements and which part of the sustainability standards will apply. First of all, it really doesn't matter whether the engagement is mandated by law or regulation or whether it's voluntary. Because what determines which part of the standards applies is the nature of the engagement. So if in a jurisdiction even hasn't adopted Part 5, which is the case you're putting forward, if a firm chooses to report in accordance with IESBA standards, maybe it's because that's investors' expectations, maybe it's because the firm is a member of the firm of firms and therefore has to comply with the IESBA code, as long as the engagement meets the scoping criteria of Part 5, that firm will be required to apply Part 5. If the engagement is not within the scoping criteria of Part 5, that engagement will need to perform in accordance with Part 4B. That is all that there is to it. It's as simple as that.
Can I just check, is that the difference between general purpose and special purpose? Is that what you're referring to?
No, it's not. The criteria, the scoping criteria for Part 5 is yes. The framework has to be a general purpose reporting framework. And therefore, by definition, any special purpose sustainability report information prepared in accordance with that framework, the special purpose will be in Part 4B, right? So that is basically the approach that we have taken in the code in Part 4A relative to audit of financial statements. So it is an equivalent approach where we say it's information is prepared in accordance with the general purpose reporting framework. So we should not confuse the issue between what is mandated and what is not mandated, because Part 5 will apply whether it's mandated or whether it's voluntary. That's what we have to be very clear. It's the scoping that drives which part of the code applies, and also whether you are TA or non-TA. If you are going to comply with the IESBA code, you must determine which lane you're in. And speaking about lane, if I might also speak very briefly about the issue of complexity and the perceived complexity of the flowchart. Really what the flowcharts are intended to really drive across is that they are helping the practitioner determine which swim lane they need to be in. And that's why we always start with that first question, the top-level question. Are you under direction,
apologies to interject, but it strikes me, I don't want us to go into the technical detail of it, but it strikes me there might be the need for some further, just looking at it to make sure it's abundantly clear, because if somebody that's very technical like Janine might not have gotten to that answer, I suspect there are very many other people out there that would get to a different answer. So maybe just a clarity of wording aspect. Shall we move on to the next point? Thanks. Ken, any other points from your side on all of these?
I will just take 2 minutes, just in relation to the other points, if I may. And I know Danny raised a number of technical points. One is the perception that there is going to be differential expectations with respect to independence for a sustainability assurance practitioner that is under direction, supervision, and review, and another practitioner who isn't. That is by design and that is by intent, and that is really all coming from the assurance standard under ISA 5000. And what I mean by that is, when it comes to using the work of another practitioner, and that's a concept that's defined, another practitioner is a firm that's not under direction, supervision, and review, or put it another way, which is how it's couched in ISA 5000, it's a firm that in which the reporting firm is not able to sufficiently and appropriately be involved in that work of that another practitioner. That work that's performed by another practitioner is not work that's performed for the sustainability assurance engagement. It's work they have done on another engagement, but it so happens that as part of the sustainability assurance engagement, the reporting firm considers that it may be able to use that work for its purposes, for the purpose of this sustainability engagement. So it's, in other words, these are two different engagements, and therefore it is not, if you will, feasible for the reporting firm to impose the same level of independence requirements that it would in relation to a component practitioner that is used for purposes of the
Ken, we are going into a lot of technical detail now, so I would suggest maybe you and Janine must have a conversation about that. I think the overarching comment is just maybe you need to clarify also your conclusions and the why in that flow chart.
Yeah, well, we can certainly look at that, Linda. Thank you very much.
I think that would be useful for people to understand the underlying thinking of you know, in slightly different situations, how to apply the principles of when are you applying, depending on where you fit in this whole process, when are you applying which independence requirements. Gabriela, I think we can possibly move on to experts, can we? Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, if I can just, as we progress to the finalization, and I think this conversation even manifests, there's an appetite, or there is no appetite in this to not have the answers to a variety of scenarios and situations. And so we're seeing that. I think it's, we have to recognize the maturity of this landscape, especially in ethics. And the challenge on complexity and precision is because there's and perhaps I'd say there is an appetite to work through scenarios and have solutions to enable a consistent application and interpretation. And unfortunately, the platform we're playing on, or the game we're playing on, is the standards. And there's no other way at the moment to capture all of those thought processes. So I think it's just a tone and a balance as we start to think that there is a lot of content and explanation. It does not have to reside in the standards. It can reside elsewhere. And even as we explore areas and emerge it, the standards may remain silent in a sense because it's captured by the principle. That's a very hard challenge to balance as you get to your finish line. And I think we're experiencing some of that. So I think complexity, I think we just have to recognize the precision will come over time, but it's an uncomfortable place when we want to answer all of the scenarios. But it's okay to remain silent. Standard setters have done that in spaces for many years. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think we all recognize that the nature of the beast is complex and it's new, which makes it even more complex. There's a level of clarity, as much clarity as possible is useful. But having said that, there will be areas where, in a way, you don't yet know what you don't know when it comes to some of the consequences. And I take your point that some of it at least might be dealt with through, as time goes by, some adoption, implementation material, all those work that you want to do, guidance and so on. But and maybe sometimes it's just a matter of almost recognizing that, you know, these points need further detail as we go along. And Gabriela, maybe in the interest of time, we just had a few smallish comments, but let me just mention to you what we had on, if I can find my notes again, what we had on experts. So the first one was, it's a little bit linked to that comment before when it comes to the CCO, competence, capability, objectivity, a requirement for external experts. Where that requirement is that the external expert must meet the CCO, but obviously that's it's preferred to be done, that check to be done at the beginning, but or before you use the expert. But realistically, you say it's preferred, but it's not a requirement that it must be done, and in a way that's understandable. But and then you talk about the continuous updating of that CCO, but just also what if somewhere along the line, there is a risk, and we recognize that somewhere along the line, you might decide as the assurance provider, as the group assurance provider, that actually that expert is does not meet the CCO, just maybe a clarification of the consequences or the actions that need to be taken. We thought that was missing. We thought that it is a little bit worrying that you start using an expert and you might actually then decide, well, maybe this guy doesn't actually meet the requirements needed. What then, when you're very far down the line, but also what's the consequences of that? So that's the one point. Oh, and then there was just a general point that came up in our discussion, that sometimes it seems as if there are instances, and you probably just want to go through the document. Janine said she made the comment at the meeting. There are instances in the application material where it sometimes go almost beyond the standard. You know, the requirement is this, but then the application material might go a little bit further. So if you pull out all the application material, might be comfortable that the requirements deal with everything. But I know she made the point, but the requirements deal with everything, and the application material is really explaining it and giving further guidance. But I think that's the polishing that's probably going to come through the final drafting. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. On the first topic, yes, that was discussed during the board meeting as well. What should we require first? If it was appropriate to require that the use of the external expert is only decided after a full check of whether the external expert is CCO or not. And practically, we came to the conclusion that that might, in very many situations, prevent the use of the expert, because when the use of an external expert becomes clear, the need for the use of an external expert becomes clear, in many situations there is no time to do this check in a fully, to do a full check before time. So we needed to make sure that we were being as demanding as needed, but without preventing the use of an external expert in very many situations. That is clear. So, of course, if the check is done before and the conclusion is that the external expert is not CCO, can't be used, so that there is no doubt. If it comes, it becomes understood or known during the process or the use of the external expert that that can be the case, then, of course, there will be safeguards and mechanisms in place to address that we maybe need to make a little bit more clear in the application material and guidance, but in that case the code applies. All the conceptual framework and the principles and etc. already existing apply to those situations. How they apply in concrete and what decisions they will drive, that's possibly what we need to make a little bit more clear. But this is not anything that we haven't addressed, and it's being, again, addressed by the experts task force in consequence of the discussions in September and of the fact that this was raised and discussed and etc. So hopefully by November we will have a clear response to that absolutely appropriate concern and question about what to do if that happens. On the second topic, which was on going beyond the standards, I think that I understand your concern is that if we were to delete all the application material, if the requirement is strong enough, and that's possibly a test that we will have to make at the end, is to pull out separate the requirements and the application material and see how far it goes and how resilient the standards and the requirements are. So thank you for that. We will take that on board, but for the time being, we think that they are robust enough, but maybe there are some tweaks that we may need to do or whatever. So that's it.
Thank you, Gabriela. We have a few minutes left, and we really want you to talk about firm culture and governance. I just want to double check, Janine, there are no important points that we left off. Happy. And Gabriela, on firm culture and governance, we're not really going to comment. We noted we got the feedback from Janine on your progress. We also got the feedback from Janine on the level of energy of your board when it comes to this very complex and very interesting and important topic. So we know it's work in progress, and we know you're working towards your project plan and so on, but we would like to get the feedback from you. Maybe you just want to talk for the last 5 minutes on that. Thank you. Apologies, Gabriela, your mic.
Oh, sorry.
I just realized now I can't hear you well.
So I'll start again. Nothing important. Yes, we had a very, very substantial discussion on the very last day of a long week at board meeting. So I was surprised by the level of energy and engagement of the board members. I think it was the only discussion where everyone had something to say, and I think that we are going in the right direction. This is not an easy work stream. And the PIOB were taken with us in this journey of scoping, making sure that we were addressing the right topics, that we will not go beyond our mandate, but that we will cover everything that we need, that we will be useful. That's the purpose. It's not to anything but make something which is in the public interest. I think that we are now in a good place. As I had anticipated in the July meeting with the PIOB, but that had not yet been discussed thoroughly by the task force and the board. The idea is to have, and the proposal, the preliminary recommendations, is to divide this work stream into work streams, let's call it like that for the time being, a standard setting project and a non-authoritative material work stream. The first one focused mostly on governance. Let's put it in a very wide and open way. Standard setting project on governance. The UK and Japan as well, at least, already have their own audit governance codes. These are examples, but of course, this is going to be international, an international framework, so we cannot just replicate what the UK and Japan have already done, even if there is a very good inspiration. But we want to be really focused on an international framework that could help the firms become the highly ethical firms. I heard you very well, Dave, in July, and I think this is as you see, the approach that we are taking. Help the firms to be the highest ethical firms they could become. And then another project, a non-authoritative material work stream, where we will put the pieces together of everything that we learned over this long journey of outreach, connection with stakeholders, and etc., and try to address a few topics and a few elements, which probably part of them are not for the years, but to be addressed. We will see in the future, but it would be regrettable that after having done realize that this will be important pieces for the building of highly ethical firms, that we would leave them out and unaddressed and unspoken just because they are not in the standard setting project. So this is a little bit not yet clear what we are going to do with this, but it's a framework that will raise awareness about the roles of other stakeholders in this space, namely regulators, but also the profession, and etc. There is a role for each one of them in this. We don't believe that the IESBA will solve, will have the magic wand with the standard setting project of defining what a highly ethical firm is going to be. We will contribute with the standard setting project, but there is more to be done by us in the future, most probably. And let me tell you that after all this long journey, my conclusion is that in the near future, we will probably come to the conclusion that everything that we are doing flows into the firm culture and governance vision and framework, if I can call it like that. So we are trying to, at the same time, we listened very well to stakeholders and namely to the PIOB with respect to the need to focus, scope, be clear about what we are going to do in terms of standard setting, but not limit ourselves to this approach and take other things on board. It's been an incredible journey. I think that part of the stakeholders, and maybe the PIOB, think that we took too long to get here, but it was necessary. We needed to be solid, robust, clear. We needed to speak with everyone. The incredible number of meetings that we had, it's not only because we needed to listen to everyone, but because everyone wanted to be listened. Everybody wanted to speak with us about farm culture and governance. So this is not going to be easy to deal in terms of outreach and stakeholder management, but we are excited about this. We are also aware of the difficulties and obstacles and challenges ahead. We are not neglecting them, but hope to be able to provide something very valuable which will really contribute to creating highly ethical farms. So this is the input that the board gave us. Public trust needs to be reinforced, and I think that this is the central idea. We need to cover both audit and consulting and advisory services within the same firms. We won't, of course, work on the structure of the firm, legal structure. It's not for us to change it, but understand how the existing legal structure of the firms impacts their ethical behavior, ethical culture, and governance, and etc. So I think that we are very well positioned for a final report and recommendation to the board in December, and to start working actively, probably in 2 different groups in this standard setting project and non-authoritative material for other topics.
Thank you very much for this, Gabriela. And no, we never had the thought that you were taking too long at all, so don't worry about that. This is such an important project, and it is really important, as you say, to think about it clearly. There are very many elements. We like the fact that you hang it on creating that highly ethical firm. And then obviously there are lots of building blocks and pieces. It's a little bit modular almost over time, where you might want to add things which we believe is really, positive. So we're looking forward to your final project plan on this, but definitely supportive of the direction, because as we said before, it's very important to understand what the objective is and understand what you're working towards, because you could easily in a project like this become all things to all people. One of the PIO members said you don't want to have a solution and looking for a problem. You want to know what you want to focus on, and we can certainly see this very much from what you're doing. So thank you for that. Gabriela, we do have a minute or 2 to spare. We have a few little approvals to do now in the public section, but I don't want to close off without just circling back to you to check if there's anything else from your side that you want to raise with us.
Thank you very much, Linda. I think that I would have a lot of things to raise, but I will save your time. I think that these 2 areas of sustainability and farm culture and governance will keep us very busy over the next year, very, very busy. Sustainability will not be done. And it's not because we have Part 4B, it's because we have adoption and implementation, which, if anything, is going to be more challenging than developing the standards, to my view. Our conviction nowadays, in my conviction and our conviction and the conviction of the board, is that we can't just issue standards, publish standards, and then let them to be adopted by their own. That won't happen. We need to work for that. And that part of the work is really challenging for an organization like us, but we will take it seriously, and we need to do it. And the farm culture and governance, of course, we have a few other things in parallel, like the CIVs and etc. But we'll see what we decide by the end of the year, but it's not our plan to start immediately with a lot of things in parallel, because we need to focus, we need to stabilize sustainability, and we need to have a great focus on farm culture and governance to make sure that it's going to be a solid, robust, meaningful project. So I think that's it's going to be time for this board to stop before going. And maybe we will have to delay a little bit a few things to make sure that we are not spreading our scarce resources among a lot of projects and temptations, but really focus. And maybe some people will say, well, you're having not that many projects, doesn't matter. Standard setting is not an end in itself. We will do it when and if needed and required by the public interest. And I think that it is my conviction that the public interest now requires us to be very focused on what we have on our plate today. On CIVs, it's in good shape. I think there was some hesitation, some perplexities. You won't see it in the December agenda because we need to be focused on sustainability and give a little bit more time to the working group to take the direction that was given by the board and move forward. So maybe March you'll have something, but they are working in good pace, at a good pace, and I think that finally we understand where we need to go, and there will be some work done on addressing this perceived or real gap in the code about the independence provisions applicable to third parties involved with CIVs, investment funds and pension funds, which we are not sure that are well addressed or completely, fully addressed by the existing provisions. This is the direction that we are taking.
Thank you very much for that. And all I can say then to conclude the session with you and the IESBA, as a IESBA leadership, is good luck. I know there's a final stretch ahead, but it's not necessarily always a downhill stretch. It will probably have a few little hills, but good luck with that. And absolutely supporting your focus that from now to year end, the focus is on getting sustainability out. Thank you very much. I would like to invite the three of you to stay on. We have a short public session to conclude before we close the public session, if I may. I would like to move on then to which is our agenda item number 15, which is the approval of the public session minutes. There was a small edit that I picked up that I just asked Martin to correct, but can I just get check with the board members whether you're comfortable to approve those? Yep. Everybody comfortable? Okay, thank you. And then the next point is at a previous session we discussed the nomination process and the appointment in terms of the third cycle. I'm going to hand over to you, Martin, so that we can just do that ratification.
Thank you, Linda. This is just briefly to ratify the decision made at our July board with respect to reappointments and appointments to the IESB and IESBA. As per our procedure, all those individuals have been informed of their appointment, but we are holding back on a public announcement on that procedure until the final part of our third cycle involving additional outreach for one vacancy is completed. We anticipate that final part of the procedure will be finalized and published by the end of this month or the first days of November, by which time we will then make fully public the names of all of the reappointments and the appointments.
Everybody comfortable with that ratification? Okay, thank you. The next point is just a couple of things for noting. We've got the 2025 PIOB calendar where you can see our proposed meeting dates. We have the meeting dates of the standard setting boards, the SAC, etc. The next step for us will be between Martin and I in the next couple of weeks. We will reach out to you regarding the observations and availability for observations, so that is still to follow, but that's just for noting. Everybody comfortable with those? Okay, and then similarly we've got the IESB and IESBA approvals for the rest of this year, as well as the due process status update for noting. And Martin, anything else that we need to deal with under this section? All right. Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of this public session. So we will stop the recording now, and thank you everybody for your participation. Thank you.